A world on edge, the nuclear threat. In today's world, the specter of nuclear conflict looms larger than ever before. The delicate balance of power teeters on the edge, with nations flexing their military might in a show of strength and deterrence. The world watches with bated breath as the tension in the air is palpable. Every move, every statement by world leaders is scrutinized, analyzed, and often feared. The stakes have never been higher, and the margin for error is frighteningly slim. Tensions between Russia and the West have reached a fever pitch. Diplomatic relations are strained, and the rhetoric from both sides is increasingly hostile. The echoes of past conflicts reverberate through the halls of power, reminding us of the fragile nature of peace. The unthinkable, once relegated to the realm of Cold War paranoia, now feels terrifyingly possible: nuclear war. The memories of bomb shelters and duck-and-cover drills are no longer just historical footnotes, they are becoming relevant once again. The very existence of these weapons, capable of unimaginable destruction, hangs over humanity like a sword of Damocles. Each warhead represents a potential apocalypse, a single misstep away from unleashing devastation on an unprecedented scale. The potential consequences of their use are too catastrophic to comprehend fully. Cities reduced to ashes, millions of lives lost in an instant, and the long-term environmental impact that could render vast areas uninhabitable for generations. Since the dawn of the atomic age, the world has lived in the shadow of nuclear annihilation. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not just acts of war, they were harbingers of a new, terrifying era. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki serve as stark reminders of the devastating power we possess. The images of those cities, once vibrant and full of life, now reduced to smoldering ruins, are a testament to the destructive potential of nuclear weapons. The haunting images of those cities, reduced to rubble in an instant, are forever seared into our collective memory. They serve as a grim warning of what could happen if we fail to control the spread and use of these weapons. The development of nuclear weapons marked a turning point in human history, ushering in an era where the capacity for self-destruction reached unprecedented levels. It was a moment when humanity gained the power to annihilate itself, a sobering realization that continues to shape our world. The threat of nuclear war is not a relic of the past, it is a clear and present danger. The geopolitical landscape is fraught with tension, and the potential for miscalculation or escalation is ever present. The geopolitical landscape is fraught with tension, and the potential for miscalculation or escalation is ever present. In a world where communication can be instantaneous, the risk of a misunderstanding leading to conflict is alarmingly high. The proliferation of nuclear weapons to more countries only exacerbates the risk, increasing the likelihood that these weapons could fall into the wrong hands. The more fingers on the nuclear trigger, the greater the chance of a catastrophic mistake. The consequences of such an event are almost too terrible to contemplate. The immediate loss of life would be staggering, but the long-term effects on the environment, global health, and political stability could be even more devastating. We must confront the stark reality of the nuclear threat. It is not enough to hope that these weapons will never be used. We must actively work to reduce the risk and prevent their proliferation. The potential consequences of inaction are too dire to ignore. We cannot afford to be complacent, for the cost of a nuclear conflict would be nothing short of apocalyptic. The path forward requires a collective commitment to diplomacy, disarmament, and the peaceful resolution of conflict. It is through dialogue and cooperation that we can hope to build a safer world. The survival of our species may very well depend on our ability to avert the catastrophe of nuclear war. It is a challenge that requires the best of our humanity, our wisdom, and our resolve. Only by working together can we ensure a future free from the shadow of nuclear annihilation. The shadow of history, echoes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, two cities forever etched in history, not for their grandeur or cultural achievements, but for their utter annihilation. The atomic bombings of these Japanese cities in 1945 stand as horrific testaments to the devastating power of nuclear weapons. The world watched in horror as the mushroom clouds rose, marking the dawn of a new and terrifying era. The immediate devastation was unlike anything ever witnessed before. Tens of thousands of people vaporized instantly, their shadows burned into the pavement. Those who survived the initial blast faced a slow and agonizing death from radiation sickness. The bombs did not discriminate. Men, women, and children alike were incinerated, leaving behind a desolate landscape of rubble and ash. The long-term consequences of the bombings continue to haunt the survivors and their descendants. Cancer rates skyrocketed in the years following the attacks, a grim legacy of the radiation exposure. Genetic mutations passed down through generations serve as a constant reminder of the horrors unleashed on those fateful days. The world bore witness to the devastating and long-lasting effects of nuclear weapons on human life and the environment. Hiroshima and Nagasaki serve as stark warnings from the past. They remind us that the use of nuclear weapons is not a theoretical exercise in military strategy. It is an act of unspeakable cruelty with consequences that reverberate for generations. The lessons learned from these tragedies must guide our actions in the present, urging us towards a future free from the threat of nuclear annihilation. The unimaginable unleashed, the immediate aftermath of a Russian nuclear strike. The world holds its breath. Tensions, simmering for months, finally boil over. A blinding flash followed by a deafening roar shatters the illusion of peace. Russia, driven by desperation or hubris, unleashes its nuclear arsenal. The initial target, perhaps a NATO base or a European capital, is instantly vaporized, leaving behind a smoldering crater and a shockwave that ripples across the globe. The immediate aftermath is a scene of unimaginable chaos and destruction. Buildings crumble, bridges collapse, and communication networks go dark. The air, thick with smoke and dust, is filled with the screams of the dying and the frantic pleas for help. Emergency services, overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster, struggle to respond to the overwhelming need for medical attention and rescue efforts. The living envy the dead. Those who survived the initial blast face a terrifying new reality. Radiation sickness, a silent killer, begins to take its toll. Nausea, vomiting, and hair loss are just the first signs of a gruesome and agonizing death. Hospitals, already overwhelmed, are ill-equipped to handle the sheer number of casualties, leaving many to suffer and die without proper care. The world watches in horror as the true extent of the devastation becomes clear. The death toll climbs exponentially, each number representing a life cut short, a future extinguished. The use of nuclear weapons shatters the illusion of safety and security, leaving behind a world reeling in shock and disbelief. The very foundations of civilization are shaken to their core as humanity confronts the abyss it has created. Section 4. A global firestorm, the spread of radiation and nuclear winter. The initial blast is just the beginning of the nightmare. Carried by the wind, radioactive fallout spreads far beyond the initial impact zone, contaminating everything in its path. Invisible and insidious, it seeps into the soil, the water, the very air we breathe. No corner of the globe is spared from its deadly reach. The global ecosystem suffers a devastating blow. Crops wither and die in the fields, poisoned by the fallout. Livestock, their flesh contaminated, become unfit for consumption. The once vibrant tapestry of life on Earth begins to unravel, leaving behind a desolate and toxic wasteland. Famine, on a scale never before witnessed, stalks the land. The skies darken as smoke and debris from the nuclear firestorms rise into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun. Temperatures plummet, ushering in a period of prolonged darkness and cold known as nuclear winter. The delicate balance of the planet's climate is thrown into disarray, with catastrophic consequences for all living things. The environmental devastation further exacerbates the humanitarian crisis. With food and water supplies dwindling, competition for resources intensifies, leading to widespread conflict and social breakdown. The very fabric of society unravels as desperation and fear drive people to desperate measures. The world, once interconnected and interdependent, descends into chaos and anarchy. Section 5. Crumbling foundations, the collapse of nations and the international order. The post-nuclear world is a chaotic and unforgiving landscape. The international order, built on a fragile foundation of treaties and alliances, crumbles under the weight of fear and suspicion. Governments, struggling to maintain control amidst the chaos, resort to increasingly authoritarian measures in a desperate attempt to maintain order. National borders, once inviolable lines on a map, become fluid and meaningless as populations flee the fallout zones in search of safety and security. Mass migrations driven by desperation and hunger overwhelm neighboring countries, straining resources and inflaming existing tensions. The global refugee crisis reaches unprecedented proportions, dwarfing anything seen before. Economic systems, already weakened by the initial disruption, collapse entirely. Supply chains break down, currencies become worthless, and trade grinds to a halt. The interconnectedness that once characterized the global economy disappears, replaced by a fragmented and dysfunctional patchwork of isolated enclaves. The world, once characterized by cooperation and diplomacy, descends into a new dark age. The threat of further nuclear strikes hangs heavy in the air, fueling a climate of paranoia and mistrust. The very institutions created to prevent such a catastrophe lie in ruins, victims of the very forces they were meant to contain. The future, once bright with promise, now appears bleak and uncertain.